Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. This is Joe Saponari of SciMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigman of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. For the freshest content, a peek behind the scenes, and more candid conversation about running our businesses, dealing with clients, fixing tough technical issues, and everything else you love about Command Control Power, we invite you to join us on Patreon so you don't miss any of this great content. Go to commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the patron-only shows right in your favorite podcast app. Once again, to join us on Patreon and get the latest patron-only episodes, visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. We hope to see you there, and thanks for listening.
So being in the business that we're in, we have the opportunity to work with the 87-year-old who had male problems, and then we get to talk to people in corporate environments. So one of my clients is a medical services provider in New York City. And I don't have very many clients in New York City, but this is one of them, and they've worked out pretty well. And I'm like you, Joe. I'm the puppet master in Connecticut pulling the strings in New York.
Nice.
Yeah, not quite as far as Colorado.
Right.
So what seems to be a trend now in the medical profession is for a established business providing, let's say, wellness services, like whether it's therapy or something like that, to put a little satellite office or a little base camp in larger organization. And this seems to be something that this particular medical office is doing. So they're putting in a wellness center in this other place of business. And this place of business happens to be an investment firm, a global investment firm, who shall remain nameless. So initially, when they set up camp, we had discussions about they wanted very much, this client uses Mac Practice, they very much wanted to have a Mac Practice server running in that environment. The way Mac Practice is set up, it still uses Mac Minis, locally hosted database. They have nothing in the cloud. It doesn't appear like they're going to be moving in the cloud in the near future. And most of these databases run off of a headless Mac Mini. So that's what we've got deployed in a couple different locations for them. And this was going to be their next location. And so we had discussions initially about, would they be getting their own router? Would they be on this hosted network? Because of the security implications with this global investment firm, they wanted my client to exclusively be on their network. So that was fine. So we got Mac Practice set up, and it's been rolling now for a couple of weeks. One of the things that we always like to put in place is an offsite backup. So we do the double encryption with Backblaze. So we have Backblaze pick up the encrypted database, and we encrypt it at rest, and we encrypt it at transit. So there's no security risk there. And then we like to have just a local database. So if anything should happen to the Mac Mini, they can get back online rather than waiting for us to download a copy of the encrypted database and then reset it up. So this was the last piece of the puzzle that I needed to put in place. I had a drive sent to my client, and they were going to shuttle it over to the Mac Mini. Now, my understanding was this Mac Mini was in a protected server room, as one would expect it to be, under lock and key, where not everyone had access to the network hardware of this particular investment firm. So my client communicates to them that we need to have this drive plugged into the Mac Mini, and it's for my local backup that I'm going to set up for them remotely. And the investment firm comes back and they said, this server, is this your server or is this our server? Is the drive wiped or does it have data? Is the drive going to be monitored and it's going to be performing regular backups? And will the hard drive remain in place or will it need to be removed? Is the hard drive a spinning disk or an SSD?
What?
And is
I'd be like, where are you going with all these questions?
Well, and then someone else from the investment firms chimes in and he says something like, yeah, overall, the idea of plugging in a removable drive into health records server is not a great idea. And I'm assuming it's encrypted and properly tracked, but there really should be an internet-based backed solution rather than something sitting on the server.
Wow.
So I didn't know this conversation was going on, and then it gets forwarded to me. My initial impression of this is like, this is our equipment, it's our records, it's in a protected server space. This is none of your business.
Right. It's overstepping a little bit, it sounds.
Yeah, it's overreaching. Fine line, okay? Yes, we are on their network as they specified. And I think they even put us on a unique subnet. So no traffic of theirs goes on this subnet. It's completely isolated. I took a deep breath and I wrote, "Thank you, gentlemen, for your concern. My understanding is that our Mac Mini is in a protected server room, and we need a backup of our data in the event of a catastrophic loss due to a computer malfunction. Yes, in addition, we also provide an encrypted offsite backup, and we do indeed need a nearline backup. If this Mac Mini was not in a protected space, we would never suggest to have an external drive attached. Thank you."
Yeah, great response.
And I left it at that, and they've been stewing on it now for over a week. It's such an interesting thing where you have that one hurdle of just the normal back and forth communication with the client, letting them know what they need, setting expectations. And then you have somebody else who's poking your relationship with a stick almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you feel like it's a one-to-one conversation between you and your client. You're making recommendations like you always do. And then it turns out there's other people involved, and we all overlap to some degree with other providers. And we try and walk those lines carefully sometimes. I try not to overstep my bounds. And if I have an opinion on the way something is being done and I want to advise my client accordingly, fine. But it just sounds like they're shaking the tree a little bit with like vague kind of concerns. And I don't know, maybe if it was done without editorializing on, it's like, at least maybe that's okay. It's like, I don't mind that they're chiming in, whatever, as long as they don't push it too far. But yeah, you have to approach it differently than you would if you're just talking to your client in that case.
Indeed. And the fact that their interaction with the server becomes zero. There's no, except maybe they're thinking they're going to have some of their employees' health records on this server. Maybe they're thinking that far out. This is just so far reaching. One of the interesting things is if this was coming from another IT company, then it's time to take off the boxing gloves and get a little fisticuffs going.
You might want the boxing gloves in that case, depending on who the provider is.
True.
He wants to bare knuckle fight them.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I'm impressed, Jerry. It's never a good thing to get your gander up unnecessarily about a client situation. And then it's like sometimes then you're coming from that perspective where like you feel like defensive, they're already attacking you or whatever. But it sounds like that didn't happen in this case. You handled it really carefully and properly, and you didn't get too worked up over it. I'm impressed. That's great.
It was much easier to take a step back only because of the fact that my client already knew that this was what we were doing on their other installations at their other locations. And this was standard operating procedure for us. At that point, I can have my client simply move forward and know that there isn't a locally hosted backup, that if in fact we did need to do some sort of data restoration, it's going to take a little bit longer because we're downloading it from Backblaze.
Yeah, I'm still questioning where they were coming from with their concern. Okay, so you've got a server somewhere in the facility plugged into a network. That's supposed to be isolated by them, and whatever they want to do on the network side, fine, just give me an IP address. What's the difference if you plug in an external hard drive to that? Is there more of a risk that I'm not seeing? Because somebody could unplug the hard drive and walk off with it. They could unplug the whole Mac Mini and walk off with it. What's the difference there?
Yeah, it's not that there's a major difference between a hard drive and a tower or something bigger. It's a Mac Mini. You can stuff that under your shirt.
I think the other thing too is if somebody has access to the cage or the server room where they have their information, they've got bigger problems than somebody just taking my drive.
Right. It's all bets are off in general. So these concerns are the most valid thing I think I heard you say from them is, shouldn't there be a cloud backup? And to your point, yes, of course there is, but we also want a local backup. It's not either or. Yeah, I don't see any really valid concerns that they're expressing, and maybe they're just trying to put their 2 cents out there in case they have to come back and point to something later and say, we tried to help here, you guys didn't listen. So I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to preempt something like that.
Or who knows? They probably put the Mac Mini server in their coffee break room.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
why they're concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
They just don't want a hard drive hanging off of it, looking at it. Yeah. It's funny you bring this up because I had one a few weeks ago where I got this email. I got a phone call actually from the wiring contractor that we were using. And he said, this guy so-and-so is recommending a bunch of equipment. And I wasn't planning on installing this equipment. I was just planning on running these wires per your original spec and plugging in this one access point that's already there. So is something changed? Who's saying what now? Oh, yeah, the client's IT guy is saying blah, blah, blah. So once again, who the F am I? It's like her IT guy. I thought I was her IT guy. I need to meet her IT guy. I'd love to meet this IT guy. So I'm like, so the wiring contractor was, all right, okay, I'm glad I called you. I'm going to reply to this and copy you on it. Yes, please. That's great. And just get everybody on the same page. So great. So then I get his email. So he handled it really nicely. And I replied back. So the email was basically like, hi, client, as discussed or whatever. It's like, here's the equipment I recommend. And it's, we're going to set up a Unify controller on her Mac. We're going to have it back up to Dropbox. And here's the recommended switch. And here's the access point. And here's the one for outside. Okay, so we have a controller. It's built into the Dream router. That's all in place. Everything's working well. She's just moved her home office and we're putting wiring into her home office and adding an access point.
So who was this?
It's an IT guy from her company.
It wasn't Sam, was it?
No, yeah.
Okay, good.
No, she used to have her own company and we had some mutual clients and we were supporting her and supporting some of her clients and all this stuff. And then I think she handed that off to somebody else and then got hired working exclusively for one of her former clients is now her employer. Essentially. And they're in a different state and some bigger operation. And there's an IT guy there. But the point was this guy's just coming in recommending a bunch of stuff. And by the way, these were all like links to Amazon because of course you can't get Unify equipment in general. So he's linking to sketchy stuff on Amazon. So I ended up calling the guy and just saying, okay, let's get on the same page here. First of all, her network's fine. Everything's working. We have a controller. We manage the network. I'm saying this because I'm waiting to see if he's going to say, we require blah, 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 because we're some big fancy company. We need to have access and we need to have her controller backing up to our drive. I don't know what he was going to say, but he was, okay, good. That's good to know. So that was good. And then I explained, we've already recommended this new access point. Here's our plan, whatever. So he was like, fine with it. And I said, also, I see these links go to Amazon. We can't really get this stuff from Unify right now. It's currently out of stock. We're working on different angles. But I'm not a big fan of buying this stuff from Amazon because you get no warranty. You haven't bought it from the reputable vendor.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter. I'm glad you said that, Joe. We should say this loud and clear. Anything you buy from Amazon will not be recognized by Ubiquiti as a warranted product.
That's right. Which I understand because they don't have control over that arm of their supply chain. It's being bought by some person on the internet, running a bot that's basically waiting for the stuff to be available for 5 seconds and then buying it and then putting it back on Amazon to resell. It's not a licensed vendor, unlike, say, B&H.
B&H is a recognized vendor for Ubiquiti, and you could easily do a return if you bought it from B&H.
Exactly. And so this guy's response was, well, I never use their warranty anyway. It's not worth it. The stuff's so cheap, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know. And it's pretty reliable too. But barring that, I don't want to buy something where there isn't a clear chain of custody. It's like it goes from the Ubiquiti's warehouse to some random guy on the internet, and then it gets shipped to me. That doesn't sound right.
I had one of these situations that Jerry's talked about in the past where one of my customers, they happen to be in Manhattan, got one of those fear, uncertainty, and doubt emails that comes in. It was like a newsletter form that's saying, and Microsoft has mentioned a vulnerability in Microsoft Teams. And she sends it over to me and says, have you seen this? First of all, I'm like super annoyed. I looked up the company. It's some other consulting company in the city. Why are you soliciting my client? And I think I pinged you guys offline. This jerk, what is he doing? Trying to poach my clients.
Right.
But then I looked at the email, and it goes through all this stuff that these guys found a vulnerability and this and that. And then the last paragraph, it says Microsoft has deemed this a non-threat because you'd have to have access to the internal network to do this. What is this? So I told her, listen, if someone has access to an internal network, we got bigger problems at that point than like someone getting into Teams.
Right.
I'm like, that means your firewall didn't do its job and you have other problems of accessing internal resources. So I was a little annoyed, actually. I'm not usually like this, but it was just bothered me. So I fired off a quickish reply, just saying so much, just saying, look, this is not a non-issue for one thing, but also this is just some joker IT company trying to solicit your business with fear. And I'm like, you shouldn't respond to those. We'll take care of you. Enough said. And I closed the ticket because it came through as a ticket, and I just said, status solved, done. I don't want to hear from you.
Solved with extreme prejudice. Don't ask me again.
I was annoyed that this guy just came along with that. But I've seen it happen. We've all seen it happen. It's just that wasn't even a real serious threat to be concerned of in my book.
A funny conclusion to go through all the like hand waving about this is an issue and all the fear around it. And then at the end, it's considers this not a pressing threat or whatever. So okay, that kind of undermines the whole argument. What was the relationship? Why was your client getting this email from some random IT company?
I don't actually know. I didn't ask the question. I don't know why she's on his newsletter. That's a bigger question, I guess, to ask.
Right.
They're my longest standing client. They frustrate me because they don't do anything they're supposed to do. When we first started doing our like official legal contracts, after we had David Sparks on and he got me going with all this, Jerry did the contract, you did one. We had all of our clients sign it. And this guy was, I don't sign contracts like this. You sign a contract for me. He was like all mad about it. I was like, what?
Okay.
So they still haven't to this day. It's a big problem in my book. Anyway, I don't think they're going anywhere. I just don't think they do anything they're supposed to. So who knows? One day that could change. I could be dead wrong. And one day they're going to say, sorry, Sam, we're going somewhere else.
Yeah, it's annoying. These people, they're a little overzealous and they get on LinkedIn and they might get some names or see some associations or through a friend of a friend. They never think that, because the subtext to that is, if this person had an IT guy, he's not doing his job because we're pointing out to you that there's this vulnerability. And
right.
I think that the intent probably is not that. It's not to scoop you. Obviously, they would like as many clients as they want, but they don't want to make you look bad. But that's what the implication is. It does, because it tells them that they're implying you're not doing your job.
But maybe that is the goal. I think might be thinking kindly of them, but I think that might be the goal, is to sow doubt in your current IT provider and think, we'll take care of you. These guys aren't. So who knows? I don't know their actual intent, but I feel like that is part of it, because they have to step in between the trusted relationship and give you a reason why you should consider looking elsewhere. And it has to be a drop in trust somehow.
Yeah, that definitely seems like an implication of sending that kind of email. And they have to know that a lot of the people there that are on their list may very well already have an IT company they're working with. I imagine they feel like it couldn't hurt to send this out, and maybe a few people will follow up and reply back to that and say, whoa, I don't know, how can you tell if we're protected? And then they're like, great, install our software. And then who knows, like maybe a few of those people on the list do pursue them. And yeah, it's because it is that kind of implication that, how come you guys didn't notify us? Then you're put on the defensive to say, what am I supposed to do? Just email you every day with the latest threats? No, the proper way to handle it is we're already handling it. If you're on board with our managed service plan, then we're enforcing software updates. We're automatically updating teams for you. I'm not going to email you, oh, there's this crazy threat today about this one particular app. It's no, I'm just going to deploy the updates that solve the problem. And ideally, you won't even have to know. But are a lot of these clients going to give you the opportunity to explain that to them and say, we're already handling this? It's tedious to also have to do that. So yeah, it's annoying.
Yeah. Ages ago, Luis Geraldo on the show, he used to say, you won't see much of me. And that's a good thing, right? And I don't know, I like showing my face, but I think his intent there was, we are doing it under the hood. We're just not bothering you about it.
This is just this ongoing question we keep talking about on the show about, what do you do about all the vulnerabilities, all the updates that are necessary? And again, I just think it's all comes down to pushing out software updates as quickly as possible after vetting them. And part of that is just having tools to be able to do that, and being part of a community where other people are also vetting those updates and supporting each other in deploying them. Of course, I'm talking about Addigy in particular, but there's other companies out there doing that. I think I mentioned I've set up Nudge, did a deep dive in how Nudge works and how to use it. And I've just been slowly deploying it to different policies in Addigy, and it's been helping a lot. It's so on its own, what Nudge does is it just pops up a window that explains that there's an update and you have to do it. And then when the person clicks the button there, and you can customize all the text and images and stuff like that, and the end user clicks the button, and there's different things you can connect that button to, basically. So I think by default, it just takes you over to software update, which of course then traps the user into upgrading to Ventura or Monterey, as it used to be. And really all you want them to do is update, not upgrade. So I've linked that button there to a custom GUI AppleScript app using GUI scripting, clicks the button there in software update if it's available to bring up the more updates or other updates are available, more info screen. which lets you then click the button there. So the user skips the little banner for Monterey or Ventura and gets right to the screen where you want them to click install, basically, for those updates. And I haven't done like a full review of this, but anecdotally, the policies where I have this all deployed are much more successful in staying up to date because the updates mechanism, the command line mechanism, and others have been broken for a long time, or at least inconsistent. And so we've had to come up with these workarounds. But a new thing from Addigy is being able to push out updates using MDM. That's something I need to look more into.
I've been trying to track that, not necessarily specific to Addigy, but the MDM command to do that. And I think some of the problems is whatever version of operating system they're currently on, and not only like full version, but even the point updates matter. Like I think 11.5 and later behave differently than prior to 11.5, and then Monterey behaves a little differently with volume ownership. I'm really curious about how Addigy will handle that, because it's not Addigy's issue, it's Apple's issue as to how messed up it is. And if they can handle it somehow magically for us, then I am just going to be in awe, because that's been the biggest pain in the butt for me lately.
Sam, this only works if you're on Monterey or newer.
On Addigy.
So looking at Addigy's knowledge base article on this, system updates via MDM. So this is in public beta from Addigy. It uses MDM to push out updates. The requirements are that the device is supervised. So your Mac needs to be supervised. And also on Mac OS, it is only Mac OS 12 and newer. So you do need to be running Monterey or newer, which doesn't solve a lot of my use cases. And again, I don't know if that's an Addigy limitation. I think that's, to your point, Sam, like an Apple thing where this changed on a point-by-point basis for the last two Mac OS versions and has been like buggy throughout that entire time. Really, over the last couple of years, at least, it's been buggy. But they're trying to work with that. And so this looks pretty powerful. But again, if the devices support it, and again, the Mac has to be supervised, it also works for iOS devices as well as iPads, tvOS. So you can also use this to push out iOS updates, which is a new feature to be able to do that like on a per policy basis, to be able to keep your iOS devices up to date. So that's handy to know as well. But yeah, the whole updating landscape has been imperfect for a while. And again, like Nudge fills in some of the gaps. It's been a really useful tool. I'm going to just basically push into that even further and deploy that even more widely in my policies, because I don't think these software updates via MDM really solve it for me across the board yet. I was also curious if anybody has played with S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N. Have you seen that?
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up, because I was exploring Nudge, and then I started to get into S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N, which is by Kevin White and his GitHub project. I think it's MacJutsu. We'll link to it, obviously. But yeah, I've been playing with that a little bit, and it's pretty cool in the fact that it uses the base like software update process in the background and just gives you, similar to Nudge in a way, although it uses either Jamf Helper if you're using Jamf, or IBM Notifier, which is another GitHub project, but to display a nice dialog box to the user that they have to update. And you can give them, I think similar to Nudge, you can give them a limited amount of deferrals or a limited amount of days where it's just, okay, you've waited too long and now you can't go any further without updating. And that feature is that you give them a little bit of time to say, not right now, but then at some point you have no choice. Like within 5 days, this must be done.
You give them a little bit of rope to hang themselves.
Yeah.
The funny thing about that is when you give people options for deferrals, they're going to use them, right?
Yeah.
They're going to use them to the bitter end.
Move that little notification down into the lower right-hand corner of your screen.
That's right.
Exactly.
A little corner sticking out.
That's one of the first rules of computing is if there's a cancel button, they will click it. Can I cancel it? Can I say later? Those are my first and second choices if available.
Always. And that's the difficulty. I'm a believer in giving them a couple of deferrals because I know they're going to use it anyway, but too long is just, it doesn't make any sense at some point. But anyway, going back to it, one of the things about S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N, it's great, but it also is bound by the limitations that we've already seen. Like right now, it has some issues where if the software update process in the background gets hung up, that's going to hang up S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N as well. And then I think as of right now, as of the release that we're talking about during the show, it does updates, but not upgrades yet. And that's coming, but it's not like an automatic action as of yet. You'd have to do it manually. So there's some interesting things I think that they'll build into it, but I'm hoping that Apple or the MDM vendors can fix it so I don't have to rely on something third party.
Yeah, it's amazing that we do have these third-party options that have emerged just by necessity because Apple has let this whole system break down probably at the worst possible time. It's more important than ever to keep things as up to date as possible. And our tools are crumbling under the surface. Like, why does the software update process just get hung up like that? And then you have to try all these different ways of kickstarting it. And it's just crazy. Like I see it all over the place. I see it on client Macs. I see it on my own Mac where it's like the software update's not showing. Is that because Apple hasn't released it for my machine yet? No, it's because under the hood, software update is just glitched out and I need to restart basically to solve it in some cases. So yeah, it is frustrating, but I'm also really glad these tools do exist at this point. One thing on S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N, I think Apple Silicon Macs require Jamf Pro for the MDM workflow. So if you do want to use the MDM software update option, that does require Jamf Pro as of now, as far as I know. And then Apple Silicon Macs can also update via the local update credentials running software update. So there's ways of providing the credentials to do that behind the scenes as well. They're trying to support as many machines as possible. And I think Nudge is a similar approach to trying to Nudge, I think works. I think it requires basically the last like Big Sur or Monterey. Doesn't work for 1015 and prior. I think there's still maybe the option to compile it for those, but that's not a supported workflow as of now. And S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N is supposed to work for all Apple Silicon and Intel Macs running 1014 and newer. So that's pretty great that they're able to develop for all those. So yeah, let us know if you've had to deploy that and had some success with one of the tools above, and we'd love to hear from you.
I'll throw something into the ring unrelated to updates, but just in relation to what we were talking about a little earlier with some of these offending other IT companies. I had an offending, shall we say, client over the weekend. And it's one of those things where like a ticket came in from, this is an employee at a client. I don't want to say he's a higher up, but he's like higher than the average bear, right? He's not like a C-level person, but he's someone that like oversees some people in the organization. Anyway, he thinks highly of himself, we'll put it that way. And over the weekend on Saturday, he sent two different emails, one saying, I need this app for my computer, and another saying, I'm tired of asking HCS every time I need to do something on my computer. I'm at my dad's over the weekend, and I see that's a weekend ticket that's not urgent. I'll deal with it on Monday. But a little bit of fume started to come out of my ears when I saw that. You know what, man? First of all, not cool. Second of all, these aren't even our policies. Their company is saying that they can't do this stuff, and we're just enforcing them. It's like we look like the bad guys because everything's so secure and protected. This is your boss. This is not me. I like it because it pisses you off, but it's not me doing. So I'm like, all right, I get this, and I have to develop a response here because, first of all, I wanted to tell him that these are company policies. So I was trying to help him with an issue. He was pissed off about one thing because he was trying to record something and he couldn't get his camera to work. And you know how like security and privacy, we've seen certain things need admin rights and like screen sharing and all that stuff. But like things like camera and microphone, those are things that can pop up to a standard account and you can allow. Like if you needed to, an app can show it to you and a standard user can allow their own camera. Am I right here, fellas? Or
yeah,
what?
I was going to ask you, Sam, if you knew, is that like a one-time prompt? I was under the impression if they decline that first one, the app can't prompt them again as a standard user. And I don't know if that's true or not. And also, doesn't that require that you allow standard users to approve that?
That's for screen sharing. For screen sharing, you have to say allow standard users to approve the thing. Gotcha. You might be right, though, Joe, on the camera and microphone, whereas like after the fact, then it might be locked into a system preference pane. I can't remember if afterwards, then if they wanted to go in, because you can go into the camera settings and security and privacy and adjust, but I can't remember off the top of my head if afterwards you do have to make a change. But when you do get prompted for the first time, you know, you can allow it. So we started, hey, here's how you can work through this. And I gave him some tips. And actually, you can't do that. And he started arguing with me about what you can and can't do.
Oh, man.
Dude, that's the wrong approach. I'm trying to help you out on a Saturday. And and I asked him for screenshots too. I'm on my mobile, but send me a couple screenshots. I'll have a look. And instead of helping him his cause out and doing that, he started arguing with me about what he couldn't do because he's pissed that he's not an admin. Okay, so we're done. I'm not going to help you anymore. Send me a couple screenshots when you can, and I'll be happy to look at it Monday morning. And I copied his boss on it too, by the way.
Nice.
And she requested that she be copied on all the tickets anyway. So I'm like, hey, I'm looping her in because she asked this and I want her to be aware of the situation. And to this day, it's now middle of the week. I've asked him 3 different times if what we said worked or if he needed help and anything like that. He has not responded at all. So I'm just going to close the freaking ticket.
Yeah, I would close a ticket indeed. Yeah, I bet it worked. I bet your guidance helped and he just didn't want to say that. Yes, you were right. He probably did not want to say that.
Yeah, he didn't want to say uncle.
Yeah, exactly. That's so
annoying.
Even the follow-up was the worst part. I was trying to help and then you just argued my intel. I was like, that was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. No kidding.
An employee has a boatload of attitude and then tries to make you look bad.
Right.
On top of that. Yeah.
Yeah. How far is that going to get you, Mr. Employee? Yeah. Like I get the frustration. Obviously, the right way to handle that would be something like, hey, I really wish I could enable this. Sam was kind enough to respond on a Saturday, and then he could make the appeal to his boss. Could we reconsider this policy because this tripped me up over the weekend? And I don't want to have to bother our IT company. There's so many better ways to approach this all around, but arguing with you and telling you you're wrong, it's okay. Yeah. Like what's my incentive to help you now at all?
Yeah. We're done.
Yeah. That's frustrating. Speaking of updates and things that we were talking about a little while ago, I wanted to just put a plug in for this app. I don't know why it occurs to me, Jerry, I'm sure you've seen this before, but the Mac Updater app. Have either of you guys seen this before?
Yeah, I've been running it for a while.
I had a feeling you would say that. Yeah, I figure there's not a lot of apps that I know about that you don't already run.
Yeah, I paid for it. I think it's terrific. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you've mentioned it. I heard it mentioned on MacGeekGab by recent guest Dave Hamilton. And the app is really interesting. I used it at a client I have this client that has all kinds of old software on their system, and we were doing a big upgrade. And I just thought, let me just run this and just see what it says. Maybe this will shortcut some of these updates for me so I don't have to chase down individual vendor websites and downloads and stuff like that. And it's pretty useful. It's just nice to see a recap of here's all the apps you have. Here's a list of apps with available updates. You can show upgrades separately so it knows the difference there, and it knows if it's like a paid upgrade or a different version number. It gives you update buttons for each app. It's just like pretty well done. You can run it. You can just download it and run it for free on a client machine. So if you do encounter a client that maybe you don't have a previous relationship with and you want to just get everything up to date, you don't want to just go poking around app by app in the applications folder, you can just run this and you can go down the list and say, okay, which of these do you care about? Okay, you don't care about this one. Should we uninstall it? Let's go and just delete it or whatever. So it seems to me like it could be a pretty useful tool in our arsenal here. So yeah, the Mac Updater app, the most generically named app I've encountered recently.
Yeah, that's a really interesting tip, Joe. I never really thought of it as using it as a tool to work through updates with a client. I use it on my own Mac only because of the fact that I like to have the latest update, especially now because we've moved into Ventura. There's a lot of apps that just need to be, for whatever reason, upgraded slightly to be fully compatible. And that's something before I moved into Ventura, I wanted to make sure that happened. For instance, I use the helper apps that work in Apple Mail from Small Cube software. So prior to upgrading to Ventura, I made sure that that particular app was updated, some of my key apps. And it's very powerful when you buy the paid version, and it's not very much money. I forget exactly how much I paid for it, is you could designate apps, ignore this app. So for instance, I run QuickBooks on my computer, and QuickBooks every 5 minutes, they have an update, and then they always want to push you to do the upgrade, right? We could just say, ignore it. And when it does its routine scan, and that's the thing, it'll do a regular scan of what updates have been pushed out by vendors. So you're always getting a notification. You could put it in your menu bar. You've got 5 new updates and you could review and see what they are. And some of them, like I say, are key tools for us, whether it's doing Zoom or some sort of an editing app. So I think it's really terrific. And I too heard about it on MacGeekGab some time ago and ran it for free for a while and then upgraded because it was well worth the price.
I'm actually completely new to this entirely. I'm looking at it right now because now the two of you have mentioned it, and I don't know why I've never heard of this. So it can update App Store, non-App Store, it doesn't matter. It can just keep them up to date. But is it automatic or you hit the update buttons for the apps?
So I've never seen it actually do automatic updates in the background. I don't think it'll just go off and update apps on you without you engaging it, Sam. But what you can do, if you install this helper app with a paid version, you could select all the ones that you want and you just say update all, and then it'll just automatically do them one by one. So that's great because it does all that stuff in the background. It downloads it. Sometimes you have to authenticate, obviously, and some of them need you to close the installer, and that's really dictated by the vendor and how they wrote the installer app. But most of the time, it takes a lot of the heavy lifting off your back in terms of making sure that you're updated.
I want to make a feature request here. Wouldn't it be great if Apple built this in? Just update everything. And of course, then the answer comes to mind. That's why they built the Mac App Store. It's one of the side benefits, I guess, in addition to giving them whatever it is, 15 to 30% of the revenue on those app sales. It's a centralized place to update apps. So I do like the Mac App Store for that reason. It just would be nice if this kind of feature could get Sherlocked and built into the Mac OS. There's a lot of apps that have pretty standard ways of doing this, like the Sparkle framework and other kind of just processes to download updates built into those apps. But having to go into each app and do that one by one and jump through hoops and stuff it's not difficult. It just can be a little annoying. It's nice to have a single dashboard to be able to do this. I'd like to see this app add a column for last opened to show you right there. Here's a list of all of your apps that need updates. Oh, it turns out this one hasn't been opened in a long time. Maybe a filter even to hide apps that have not been opened in some number of days. Because again, like using it on a client system, that would be a use case for me. But yeah, I don't know if things are moving more in the direction of the Mac App Store and maybe this will be less and less needed. But I was surprised too that I hadn't really used it before. Heard colleagues talking about it because it does seem pretty useful to use on a client machine.
Yeah, I'll download it and decide if I'm going to pay for the full featured version, but I'm definitely curious about it. Say you're working with a new client, they don't have MDM, or that you're not there yet in the conversation, you could technically use this to just bump up all their apps to make sure they're current on your first run, and it makes life a lot easier than going to find them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a nice, convenient thing for them. And you can do it while you're talking to them. You just bring this up and maybe have a conversation, review the apps and decide which ones they care about and which ones they don't. And as you're talking, just go down the list and update the apps. It just shows that you're able to know about and leverage tools that make things more efficient. And they get the impression, oh, okay, this person's not going to be wasting my time to click through all these screens. They're just going to find the most optimal way to do this. So it does demonstrate a little bit of value. And it's a nice thing to do, perhaps before you do an upgrade, especially if you're relatively current and then you want to upgrade to Ventura. You might go through and just make sure all the apps are ready to go first before you actually do the major upgrade, and you have less to do on the other end of things. So it seems like, yeah, it could be useful in the scope of upgrading to a new Mac OS version.
So, Sam, I was actually thinking you were just going to install that live in the show and just run updates while we were recording.
Update Skype.
That is my way.
That is the way you go down the highway, for sure. Update Skype. For all the listeners, we still record on Skype. We're old school here. And for whatever reason, it seems to work out well for us. So don't tell us about new technology.
That's why I'm just finding out about Mac Updater right now.
Yeah.
And you're just finding out about Zoom, too.
It's fascinating. I will have to do one more thing, though, just because we're on the subject, and I'll put a bow on this. But I feel the need to mention Installomator because I don't think we've talked about it on the show. But we've had Armin Briegel on before from Scripting OS 10, and he has a lot of stuff on GitHub. But he has a cool project called Installomator, which can work into either Addigy or Jamf or I think some other MDMs as well. But it can help capture the latest versions of a tremendous amount of software titles for you, so you don't have to go find them. So when someone goes to either install it through self-service or you install it for them, it will reach out to that vendor's site, grab the latest version, and install it through your MDM. I've just started playing with it a little bit recently, and it worked out excellent for me. But I would just highly recommend people give it a look-see. For if you're using an MDM solution, then something like Installomator can really kick butt for you.
So wrapping up the updates conversation, by the time you're hearing this, Ventura will have been released weeks ago, but still fresh in my mind, let's say. I have not, as of our recording, I have not installed Ventura yet, but I've been reading about it and just trying to digest as much of the information as possible. And just some things that have come up either from clients or that I thought were useful kind of PSA type features. So one thing that seemed pretty cool is in the Photos app, you can have the hidden album and the recently deleted album. Those are both locked by default. So they're locked with your standard Touch ID or password, basically, for your Mac login password. It's just one of those things that came to mind. That should have always been a feature. Like, it's funny that they'd never had that. It's the hidden album. It's like a thing you want to be hidden. So why make it also easily accessible by just showing it there as an album? Same thing with recently deleted. Sometimes people might want to delete something and then not necessarily immediately permanently delete it, but not necessarily have it be accessible to everybody who wanders by. So yeah, just a nice feature, a little nice to have. Of course, like the major Photos app improvements are iCloud shared library. That's pretty cool. I want to really test that out. I'm curious, Jerry, if you've used that yet, because you're always the earliest adopter among us. Have you been using the iCloud shared library feature yet?
It's a slippery slope, because when you share a photo with someone, first of all, they have to be on Ventura as well. And all their devices need to be on the latest Mac OS. Obviously, it stands to reason. But let's say, Joe, you and I go out on a walk and we take pictures of squirrels. As we're known to do. And you've got some on your phone and I've got some on my phone, and we want to share them together. If I share my photos of squirrels with you and vice versa, those pictures go out of your photo libraries and they go into a shared libraries. So if you were scanning through those photos on your own personal photos library, you would no longer see that photo. Now, I can delete that photo, your photo, and you get a notification and you could call it back in to that shared library, but it still stays in that shared library. So this is going to create problems for people because they're not going to understand it. And it's not like they haven't put thought into this, but for instance, that alone would confuse people. So the workaround would be you'd have to duplicate the photo. So not only is it in your photos library, but it's in the shared one. Now, the shared one, if you created it, you own it. So that is your photos library. It's not mine, but I could remove photographs from it and it gets removed from your internal photos library and creates another unique photos library on your photos. So look out.
Yeah, it does sound layered and nuanced. And I think like the thing that I thought was interesting was that it's not an all or nothing thing where you automatically share your entire photo library from 20 years or something. You can say share the last 1 year, or you can share by date and you can share by person, which is of course leveraging some of their like really cool machine learning features over the last few years, like where it's getting better at identifying who different people are and things like that. And so you can share that kind of stuff selectively. And then also it will suggest to you, do you want to put this in the shared library? So there is that distinction, like you said, between like your library and your shared library.
Yeah. And I think as long as people wrap their head around it, we talk about clients all day long on the show, and good luck with that.
Yeah. And you mentioned you have to duplicate it. And I'm just like shivering because I deal with people trying to deduplicate on their photo library, which has ballooned out of control over the years when they've split and merged their various libraries and imported and re-imported a bunch of content. And yeah, every once in a while you get these situations where the Photos app wants to re-import the same photos over and over again from a camera, and it can't figure out that it already did import them successfully. Now you've got 10 copies. Duplication in photo libraries is already a concern. So if people are figuring out that a workaround for some of the limitations or considerations of this shared photo library, that they're working around some of those things by duplicating photos, it's just like, I hope that's not going to become a standard practice. But yeah, I think the best way to deal with this is to just dive in and start testing it among your family and friends or family.
My policy will be not to mention it to clients because you could see where this could really go wrong really fast. So mom takes pictures at her daughter's wedding. She shares out the pictures with her daughter. They now go into the shared photos library and they're no longer in her primary library. Good luck with that. Good luck explaining that one to her.
You have such little faith in your clients, Jerry. I love it.
Yeah, I have to play with it because I wasn't concerned about that. It's two different places to like look for your photos. I'd be surprised if there's no unified view to be able to see all the photos from the shared library and my own library and whatever. But yeah, I need to dive in a little bit farther. Another Ventura feature, live captions, which has been great on iOS 16 apparently. I actually heard that a client was already using this for his mother, making it easier to deal with just any kind of audio can be turned into text in real time. And that's a really nice thing, a nice accessibility feature. But as we know, accessibility features apply to everybody. And so, yeah, live captions is another pretty big standout Ventura feature, I think, for people in a practical sense. So that's another one that, again, I've just been hearing about already from clients that are excited about it in Ventura because they've been using it on iOS 16 already. And then lastly, let's not forget the clock and the weather apps are coming to Ventura. So that's exciting. But I mean, wait, really? We didn't have a clock app until now? Like I'm surprised, but okay, I guess I just haven't really needed it. And weather has been an obvious one for a long time. Wow, there's like you search for weather and you get Mac App Store apps because you're like, oh, I don't have a weather app built in. That's funny, but
yeah, they bought Dark Sky. That was the app that I had been using. And so we got notification that's going to be sunsetted at, I think, December 31st or something like that.
Maps on the Mac has existed for a while, of course, and now it can do multiple stops for driving directions. Google Maps has had that for a really long time, but I like Apple Maps. Yeah, it is about time. It's one of those silly lacking features. Nice to have that for sure.
I'm glad because I used to have, if I had two places to go, I would drive home first because I didn't have the directions to the other place and then go and run the other errand.
Nice. Remember the days of printing out maps? Yeah, you'd have to drive back home and print out the next directions, right?
Yeah, I still use MapQuest for that, for sure.
Yeah, nice. Is MapQuest still out there? Did somebody like buy that domain? I wonder. That's funny. Yeah, that was like the modern technology for a year or two. How cool was that? Just to have that feature. Now it's just built in turn by turn. Oh. Amazing. Ventura supports Macs from 2017 and newer. I just thought that's just a good example of Apple supporting relatively older hardware. And that hardware is 5+ years old, only getting older. And by supporting Ventura today, remember that's going to provide support for the next 2 years, we think, 2+ years, assuming that Apple continues to support the current Mac OS and the 2 prior versions. Asterisk, because there's always a chance they just change that policy. It's not expressed anywhere that I know of. So they may very well say, hey, guess what? This time around, we're dropping, or let's say next time around, they drop both Big Sur and Monterey, and they just support Ventura and whatever the next one is. That's possible. But chances are that this means we get at least a couple years of support for Ventura on this older hardware. Kudos to Apple for supporting all this stuff on that relatively, again, 5+ year old hardware.
Boom.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the